Content warning. This podcast contains graphic descriptions of wartime events, including intense situations, injuries, and death. Listener discretion is advised. Thank you for tuning in to another compelling episode of Legends of the Barbed Wire Hotel. Please subscribe now. Subscribing, downloading, and likes help amplify these voices, ensuring the stories reach those who need to hear them most. Today, we are happy to be speaking with the daughter of legend Navy veteran William Bernard Snyder. Danette Snyder Peach grew up in my hometown, overlooking the Mississippi River in Alton, Illinois. This is Diana Mall Halstead, the Kriegie's daughter, welcoming another legend of the Barbed Wire Hotel. Danette, thank you for taking the time to speak with me today about your dad.
Thank you.
You are my second cousin,
Right.
and your dad, who I call Uncle Bern, was my dad's first cousin.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about your dad?
He was not a very big person. He was about 5'8", very slender, coal black hair, very, very active, always active, into boating in his younger years. Then in his later years, he got into some camping, and that with an RV camping. I'm an only child, so there wasn't a lot of other kids around. He was an electrician by trade, and he worked for McDonnell Douglas Corporation until his retirement. He was married twice. He was married to my mother initially, and they got married in 1947, and they were divorced in 1967. He married Jean Stefan Holk. She passed away before him. She preceded him.
In 95.
In 90.
Did your dad have any siblings, brothers or sisters?
He had a sister that was older, who was Kathleen Grafe, and he had a brother, younger, who was Thomas Snyder. And they both moved with their parents when they relocated to Phoenix, Arizona, in probably the 1950s, when they relocated out there. And they raised their families and stayed there in Phoenix. He chose to stay back here. We never relocated, but we did go out and visit every year.
Your dad's parents lived on Albee, right?
At one point in time, they did live on Albee Street before they moved to Phoenix. They were living there when he was in the service. That's where my mom met him. That's where they lived. But my grandparents lived in a number of locations in Alton because they used to buy and flip houses.
My dad's parents did that too.
Uh-huh.
It's like they lived on Franklin, then they lived here, then and it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
No wonder my dad stayed put for so long. Do you know how your mom and dad met?
They actually met. She was dating Tom.
Oh, really?
They were pretty close in age. I think they met in high school. And Dad came home from the service and it switched. So she ended up with him instead of with Tom.
So she didn't date him before she went into the service?
No.
Oh, it's only when
she met him when he was already in the service and getting ready to go. He may have actually been exiting out time that they met.
Yeah, because he came home for 3 days, 4 months before he was discharged.
They were at the tail end of that.
Where did they get married?
St. Mary's Catholic Church.
Okay, same place you got married.
Uh-huh.
Do you know how old your dad was when he enlisted?
I'm not sure if he was 17 or 18. He may have been older because he had gone to, it was more of a trade school. And so he probably was a little bit older. One time he worked at, it was on Albee Street and it's no longer there. There was not a steel mill, but it was like a tool and die. It's gone. But I know he worked there at one point in time, but I don't know if that was previous to going into the service or after he came home. Because Grandpa had a heating and cooling business before he moved to Arizona. He was trained in the trade of heating and cooling. Then they sold the business and moved. And when that happened, that's when he went to work for companies.
Your dad enlisted in the service. What branch did he go into?
Navy. And I know he went up to the Great Lakes initially.
To train?
Yes.
Like basic training?
Basic training.
He was a petty officer, electrician's mate.
I figured that there was something in there, but
he must have liked electricity.
He was really good at it. The house that they built from scratch on Mathers, he did all the wiring.
I think he did all the wiring in my dad's house too.
Because we used to go over and he'd show me.
Isn't that cool?
Mm-hmm. That he did all of that. But
I remember him putting in the electrical outlets up in we had the new bedroom upstairs, and he put in the electrical outlets and stuff. And I just thought that was something he knew how to do. Oh, what was I, like 7 or 8? When he enlisted, was he still living at home with his parents?
As far as I know.
After basic training, where did he serve?
Well, he was on a ship, and he was in the South Pacific for a considerable period of time.
Like around Japan? Or,
because there I have in a box somewhere, he had a sword, a Japanese sword. It's broken, but I do still have that that he brought home, and it's somewhere buried. But I remember that as one of the items that he brought home with him. At one point in time, that Mom said that they had approached him about going in and being on a sub because of his size.
Oh, wow.
And he refused. He said, I cannot be down, in that kind of a contained environment.
In the Air Force, where my dad was, they had the turret gunners that those had to be smaller men to go into this windy thing. And I mean, I would come out with claustrophobia.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's just like freaky.
Well, we've visited subs, that have been decommissioned that are there.
Yeah.
There's no way I could have tolerated that either.
No.
So, but I do know she said that they.
I'd keep every closet door open when I came home. I'd never walk in a closet.
That they approached him about that, and he wouldn't do it.
Wow.
Because that was elective. They didn't force anybody into a sub.
What do you think he found most challenging?
Probably the isolation of being just out there with no land. The isolation of it, I think, probably. And never knowing what's going to happen.
Did he see any action, or was his goal to make sure that the ship was wired properly? I don't know what they do.
He never talked about it. I do have a picture of the boat. I went looking, and I do have one. So this was basically the ship that he was on.
A small boat.
It doesn't look too small, but in comparison.
Let's pause our interview here to learn about the not-so-little ships, the destroyer escorts. A number of decades ago, some nice people in a drawing room got into a conversation on the subject of the Navy and the anti-submarine campaign. One remarked, "Oh, it must be terrible to see those tiny little escort vessels, the new ones." Others echoed the view, and still others elsewhere have made similar comments. From the consensus of this type of talk, it would appear that many civilians confuse the Navy's destroyer escort vessels as only slightly more seaworthy than a rubber life raft, and about as easily deflated. The facts in this matter may open many civilian eyes, and also those of the Navy men who were unacquainted with the destroyer escorts. Actually, these little destroyer escorts are bigger and better ships in many respects than the famous old broken deck four pipers, which were the Navy's best destroyers throughout most of World War I. The destroyer escort became the tough kid brother to run the dirty errands for the destroyers during World War II. The USS Chase was named in honor of Admiral Jehu Valentine Chase. She launched April 24, 1943 by Norfolk Navy Yard and commissioned July 18, 1943. Between September and November 1944, Chase escorted 6 transatlantic convoys between New York and Norfolk and North African ports. During her second crossing, while approaching Bizerte, April 20, 1944, Chase fired on attacking enemy torpedo bombers, driving them off, then rescued swimming survivors from 3 torpedoed merchant ships. During the return passage, Chase joined in the search for the U-967, which torpedoed destroyer escort 157 on May 5th. and rescued 52 survivors of the sinking vessel. Chase was converted to a Charles Lawrence class high-speed transport and sailed from Boston February 4, 1945 for the Pacific Action waters. Chase reached Ulithi on March 18, 1945, and the next day got underway for the Okinawa operation, sailing with the group scheduled to simulate a landing on the southern coast of the island as a diversion from the main assaults. This diversion received more attention from enemy aircraft than did the main landings as they made their demonstration April 1st. Chase joined in the blaze of anti-aircraft fire, which drove the enemy off, then moved north to join the anti-submarine screen protecting the landings. Aside from 2 brief voyages to Guam and Ulithi, Chase continued on the dangerous duty of patrol off Okinawa until May 20th. It was on May 20th, Chase fired successfully on a diving kamikaze, but had to maneuver violently to avoid the falling aircraft. It splashed a scant 10 yards from the ship. The explosion of the 2 bombs the kamikaze carried ripped Chase's hull open, flooding the engine and the fire rooms. With her steering gear jammed at a hard left rudder, Chase still drove off another suicide plane. Chase was damaged so badly that it was in danger of capsizing. The vessel was only kept afloat by the skillful work of her crew and towed into Kerama Reto for repairs. She was later towed across the Pacific to San Diego, where she was decommissioned in January 1946 and sold for scrap that November.
In later years, and I'm sure it was considerably later years, that he reunited with guys he served with.
Yeah, reunions.
And they used to go. He
Yeah.
did not do that at the time that I was a kid or anything like that. He didn't even
I don't
discuss
think they
it.
started for 20, 30 years.
So that was the only time that I know that he did do that.
How did his life change once he came back and was discharged?
My understanding is, and I don't know if he had this before, but that he was quick to lose his temper. And I do know that, and of course it was the social context in the time, where socially they went out to bars and drank, and then that was the social part. And he would tend to drink too much. I can remember him when I was about 4 wrapping his car around a tree or something on Albee Street.
Oh, really?
And ending up at your house that night to spend the night because he ended up in the hospital.
I don't remember that.
Oh, yeah. I do. That was vivid because it was pretty close to home. He was coming home and he had had too much to drink and he lost control and wrapped the car around a tree, and she called your folks, and they came and got me, and I ended up staying that night with you guys.
Oh, what a fun time. That I don't remember.
But
Wow.
So that was
when you lived on Albee too?
That's when we lived on Albee.
Yeah.
So that little house on Albee, which now has been torn down.
I know. I just love that house.
It was a real.
It was so unique. Yeah.
I found the paperwork on that. They bought that house contract for deed, and it cost $25 a month. Was how much they paid.
My dad bought all his houses on contract for deed. That was the way it was back in the day. Yeah,
I think it was.
So what a great thing.
Yeah.
I'd be flipping houses too.
Yeah.
When he came home, do you think his family dynamic with his parents and everybody changed?
Dad was the favored son by his mother. I think it was because he was so dark. He had the dark, coal black hair, and that reminded her of her heritage because she was always very, very proud of being Irish. There's a heritage component that if you're from a certain part of Ireland, which is Galloway, that the people there are very dark. They have the darker skin and they have the coal black hair, and it's because that part of Ireland was at one point invaded by Spain.
Oh,
so there's a
okay.
Spanish
Yeah,
lineage
I see that,
comes
yeah.
there. And she was very, Mom would even say that Dad was the favorite. But he, ironically, we're the ones that didn't follow them there.
He had curly hair too, didn't he?
Very, very
Or
curly.
wavy curly.
Oh yeah, it was coal black,
Yeah.
curly. And in the summertime he would get, because his skin tended to be dark anyway, he would get very, very dark. That's what I always understood, is that he was kind of the favored son. He had the scar on his nose, and that had come from when they lived out on a farm around Bethalto. That had come from a riding accident, because he used to do trick riding on the horses, and he fell off and broke his nose or whatever, and they had to surgically kind of reattach it.
Ooh.
So they were pretty active, and I know that because he used to go and help break horses for farmers and that.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Where was their farm?
It was somewhere back behind where the state hospital currently sits.
Okay.
Yeah. I've got a plat that shows me where the family farm was, which was actually his mother's inheritance. It was the Monahan side. But I haven't been able to put that plat and overlap current to kind of get a location of where it was. But I know that they lived there before they moved into town. They lived out in the farm too when he was a kid.
Well, that would be a fun way to grow up.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I can say that looking back, but don't put me to work on one.
Oh, no, I wouldn't want to either.
Did your mom ever say anything about how the United States had changed from when he came back? Sometimes the U.S. changes stances.
Oh, yeah. She really never talked about it. It was, they probably felt it was an opportune time because everybody had a job. She was able to work.
What did your mom do?
She started out working at the Glassworks down on Broadway as kind of as a bookkeeper. And then after I was born, she took a year off. When she went back to work, she followed Dad over to McDonnell Douglas, and she worked in what they called supply support, which was office based, but she was working on the supplies for the F-15s, F-18s, and all of that. Yeah, she retired from there.
How did his career in the Navy, well, he was in for 2 or 3 years, but how did that influence the rest of his life, do you think?
I think based just upon comments and perceptions that he probably suffered from PTSD after he got back, and that became more of a negative impact on his life. And that was hidden because they didn't talk about it in those days. That was hidden by, let's go out and have a drink, because then a lot of times the guys would start to talk. And she said that's when she learned about some of the things, was because they'd be all sitting there. They were in the service together and they were drinking, and they'd start sharing because the inhibitions of keeping it private and silent. That was probably how she learned what she knew. But I can remember her saying, because of the temper, and when he got mad, he would throw things or whatever. And there were some other violent reactions that he had. I can remember saying that she talked to medical personnel and they said it's probably undiagnosed PTSD.
Anytime you don't talk about your experience, you can't unsee.
No.
You can't unknow.
Mm-hmm.
Getting these young people at such a pivotal time in their life, 18, 19, 20 years old, it has to influence them.
Oh, sure. I would imagine it does.
If he had it to do over again, would he do it?
I don't think so.
Because he enlisted.
Yeah. I don't know. He may. And there was no family thing about being in the service. Grandpa was never in the service. He didn't serve in World War I. There was none of that. So there was no family lineage. I mean, his younger brother was in the service also, and he ended up staying and retired from the service, but he didn't stay active. It was more the reserves. He got out and he stayed in the reserves. So he literally retired from the service, but he was not in the Navy. I want to say that he was in either the Army or the Air Force. I don't recall.
In the 40s, I think the Air Force separated out from the Army like in 46 or 48 or something like that.
Okay.
They became their own entity. Do you think that influenced his younger brother?
I think just they all did. I think that was more of, this is what we do.
But it didn't influence you to want to go in?
No, I never had a desire.
Did his service, what he did for our country, did that inspire anybody in your family?
Not that I recall, because I had 5 cousins that were male, and none of them showed any desire to serve. They are all younger than me, but it's within a 10-year span. Some are older, some are young. They would have gone to Vietnam. And, I don't think that was even on the horizon for them. So I don't think there is any of that.
Before he went into the service, he liked the horses.
Yeah.
And he liked boats before he went into the service? Maybe that's why he chose the Navy.
It was just natural for him once he was out of the service. So it makes you think that he liked that. He liked being on water.
On the boat, but he had to see land.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. What were his interests after he got out?
Oh, he was kind of a jack of all trades. I mean, we did socially the boating, but it was always worked too, because I can see him crawling underneath the boat and doing stuff, or hanging off the back end of it, working on the motor in the middle of the Mississippi. He was always working on the cars. And we always had a new car. That I do remember. There was always a new car. And he maintained them. I never recall them ever going to the shop. Took care of everything with them. We also had one of the first color televisions in the area too. I remember that. So it was mechanical things,
He liked gadgets.
He liked stuff like that. He could build things and they'd look nice. So he was very good with his hands and very capable. Probably a lot smarter than we ever gave him credit for, because school was not. I know he said that. He said he hated high school.
He went to Alton High instead of Marquette.
Yeah, all of them went to Alton High.
Didn't your dad like flying?
Oh, yeah, we did. We would.
Because I think he took us on a trip over our house.
He had his commercial pilot's license. He got his commercial pilot's license on the GI Bill, basically. And he used to fly out of Walston Aviation, which is now Civic Memorial Airport. And I was probably 3 or 4, and we were flying to Arizona. No, I might have been older, because we were flying to Arizona to see my grandparents after they moved out there. And we got somewhere around New Mexico where he had to go higher, and I started to turn blue. He had to put the plane down in New Mexico, call my grandpa, and Grandpa drove, met us at this little airport, put me in the car, and everybody else got back on the plane, because it was a twin engine. Got back, I think it was a twin engine Cessna. He got back on the plane and flew the rest of the way. Coming home, we must have gone a different route, because there was no driving to someplace and going. But I got home.
Well, New Mexico is at least closer than Alton.
Yeah. It was something with the elevation that on the flight that he was going that I just couldn't tolerate.
Can you fly today?
Yeah, no problems. But I do remember that as a kid. I remember that, and I do remember him flying a lot. He didn't own a plane, but you could rent planes or do that out there. He flew out of there quite a bit. And before I was born, I think he flew a lot more. But I know at one point he tried to get in to become a commercial.
Like with TWA?
Or Ozark.
Ozark, yeah.
which no longer exists
Neither does
because
TWA.
because my parents had friends that,
Yeah.
and he was a pilot with Ozark, and I think that's how they kind of got to know each other.
Oh,
Probably flying out at the airport, and then made friends, and so that's probably why one of his interests. But it didn't pan out, so
Okay.
he wasn't able to get that. But
Wow.
yeah, he flew a lot. Mom told me later, yeah, he had his commercial license, so he had thought about doing that as a career after he got back, to go from the water to the air.
It sounded like he liked or loved life
Uh-huh.
in the fast lane, so to speak, I guess.
Things that are probably were considered daring.
Yeah, that's it, daring.
Because on the boat, it was all about water skiing. So how fast did you had to go. I'm taught at 7 or 8 years old how to drive. Once I got old enough to drive the boat, then I would be driving while Mom was spotting, because there'd only be 3 of us. And then we traded off and down.
Isn't that trusting your boat with a 7-year-old?
Well, at 7, I mowed the yard and a riding lawnmower. The neighbors went nuts because he taught me how to do it. So go mow the yard. Okay.
It's kind of like a tomboy thing.
Yeah.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you wanted to say about your dad?
No, I think he mellowed as he got older. And I think maybe if there were demons or things that he was carrying, he put them to bed. Yeah, I think he was finally able to get rid of that as he aged. He did not have a good end of his life. He had cerebral hemorrhages later in his life, and it pretty much put him in a nursing home for the last 7 years. And he didn't know anybody because they were all cerebral, so it had caused brain damage. The end of his life was not what I would have wished for anyone.
What was the last book you read?
Hang the Moon.
Oh, that's a good book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
So I'm reading about wolves now.
Oh.
Yeah. So I'm learning about people. Mm-hmm. Through the wolves.
Oh, there is because they pack.
Yeah,
like
they
people
do. Yeah. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Have you ever requested his documents from archives?
No.
I can send you a link if you want them.
Sure.
Okay. It took 2 years to get my dad's. The archives caught on fire.
I remember that.
Yeah. It took 2 years to get my dad's. They sent me 2 documents. There were 4 pages. But they sent me 2 documents, and there were 2 that I didn't have. One was his discharge paper, and one was his enlistment paper.
Ah.
And it has burn marks on it.
Oh, so
I know.
During the fire.
Yeah. So, I mean, they weren't lying. They were burned. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you for sharing this with us. If you are a veteran, or if you know someone who is, I urge you to share your story. Whether you fought in battle or worked behind the scenes, your experience matters. It's not just history, it's our history. It's a history we cannot afford to lose. At Legends of the Barbed Wire Hotel, we are committed to preserving these stories. But we need your help. Subscribe to this podcast, share it with your friends and family, and most importantly, if you have a story to tell, reach out to us on social media or email. Both are listed in our description. Every veteran story deserves to be heard, remembered, and honored. So join us in this journey. Together, we can ensure that the legends of the Barbed Wire Hotel live on. This is Diana Mall Halstead, Big Creeky's daughter, signing off. Thank you for listening, and to all veterans, thank you from the bottom of my heart for your service and your sacrifice. If you would like to purchase a copy of my dad's memoir, Writings from the Barbed Wire Hotel, click the link in the description. In the back of almost 800 pages is an index of all the sources I used to research my dad's military career and time as a prisoner of war. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Let's spread the word and keep these stories alive. And remember, every story matters, especially yours. Legends of the Barbed Wire Hotel was written by and produced by Diana Mall Halstead. the Kriege's daughter. Until next time, this is Legends of the Barbed Wire Hotel. Stay safe, stay strong, and never forget the sacrifices made for our freedom. Thanks for listening.